Thank you for joining us for Season 3 of Magic in the Room. Before we start our episode, I want to ask for your help spreading the word about Magic in the Room. If you listen to the podcast and think it's valuable, would you please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen? Once you leave a review, take a screenshot and send it to info@purposeandperformancegroup.com and we'll send you a Magic in the Room hat. Reviews are one of the best ways for people to find us, so we're thankful for the help. Now enjoy today's episode.
Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
We're back, baby!
And we're back.
Welcome back to a very special, we hope, we don't really know.
Finally.
Season 3 of Magic in the Room. I am Luke Freeman.
I'm Hannah Braderud.
And I'm excited to be here. I'm Chris Province. It's great to see you guys. We had such a good time between seasons 2 and 3. Kind of new setup, new mics.
Yeah.
We're like grown-ups.
Like
moving
production
up in
notes,
the world.
production notes, producers, the whole nine, man.
We've survived 2 seasons, and we're almost halfway to getting good at this.
That's right.
Because
another 2 seasons, we will have arrived.
Outside this room, the world might be devolving into flames and carnage, but inside this room, it's a party.
Yeah, we're becoming.
We are becoming.
Yeah, much better than being. No, good stuff. Welcome, guys. Season 3. And I know, we've kind of sat down, we mapped out this season. A lot of crazy stuff happening out there right now. We're going to talk about performance, about obviously like this whole labor issue. And goodness, anything else? Lots of guests this year.
Yeah.
This season. So I'm looking forward to that. And, we typically will run this somewhere September to July before we take another break. So I know we've got everything kind of planned out, and I'm excited to dig into all this with you guys. So here we go. Okay, so I mentioned like some of the craziness that's happening out there. Effectively, like everybody's quitting and you can't hire anyone. Did I hear right?
Yeah, pretty much. There are 4 hire signs everywhere in my little community of Big Sky, Montana, which is a resort town. About 3,500 people live there year round, but about 20,000 will visit at any point during the ski season and also summer season. You can't go out to eat. There's no restaurants that are open all day, every day, and you have to pick and choose. You never know who's going to be open on any given day. And some are only open for breakfast, some are only open for lunch, some are only open for dinner. Everybody has a sign in the window that says either temporarily closed due to staffing issues or we're open on a limited schedule due to staffing issues.
So, generically, we'll just call this the Great Resignation. I think April jobs report, we had, 4 million people resign from their positions?
Yep.
Followed by the May jobs report, which was another 4 million people resigning from their positions. Combine that with the Gallup, workplace survey, and just, it's not good. You've got self-reported, 80% of the people out there are languishing or suffering. That's their predominant sentiment right now. Those businesses are just trying to function shift to shift, hour to hour. How do we get enough people here to get a threshold amount of product out the door to continue operating? And I think for the folks that haven't left, 40% of them are saying, I want to leave. I just haven't identified where I'm going to go. Mm-hmm. So all types of red flags. So Luke, what else you got? What is it about the Great Resignation that makes it so, and why is this happening?
Yeah. Well, if I knew all the answers to that, would peace out and probably wouldn't see you guys because I'd have so many opportunities fixing all these problems. But I don't know all the answers. And I mean, like no one does, right? We're all in the same boat. Everyone's trying to figure this out. Social science researchers are trying to figure it out. Business leaders are trying to figure it out. But yeah, it is what it is. People don't feel great about where they are. For the most part, people who feel like they were supported well during the pandemic are staying more than people who felt like their organizations didn't provide support and resources during COVID. But I think there's also just this, idea of looking at the world differently. I've heard lots of people talk about shifting values. Like, hey, my wife and I were both working at home and homeschooling our kids, and we did the math and we realized we could move to a different part of the country and one of us could work. And if we changed our lifestyle a little bit, we would be fine without all of this chaos. I mean, the fact that me as an individual is hearing 5, 6, 7 people telling that same story, plus all of this data, I mean, people are just rethinking stuff. Mm-hmm. And we're at this point where like we've known about progressive workplaces long enough as a society. People have seen Undercover Boss on TV when they were teenagers, and it formed their values about what it meant to have a meaningful workplace. That's just a small example, right? But all of these pieces of our culture are like coming and slamming together to where people just like, they're kind of done with it. They're done with like showing up and trading their hours for money.
Yeah.
I mean, just all the NFT stuff that's going on around labor and like, how do I get a share of something I create? If I'm on a manufacturing line, is there a way to NFT the things I'm physically touching and putting together so I get a share of the profits from selling them? And if I move and that item gets sold again, the fact that I put it together 2 years ago means I get another cut of the profits. Like people are thinking that way in a more distributed manner. And yeah, I don't think it's going to go back.
No. And I think because, I mean, a year ago we were talking about the great reimagining, right? As we were kind of reimagining and re-envisioning ourselves as an organization, the work that we do and putting some, the hours that we were not in front of clients because so many clients were closed down. We had this time to just kind of reimagine and re-envision and rebuild. And we built a lot of content and we are coming out of this, much stronger, but in a different place than we were. And I think how many individuals haven't gone through a great reimagining of their own lives because of the lockdown, the isolation. And so there's a great reimagining. There's a great migration. People are moving to, places like Montana where I live because they're like, oh, I work remotely. I can live in a really beautiful place or I can go somewhere I've always wanted to go and spend some time there and work because I'm working remotely anyway. I hear people taking, a couple of months and working somewhere in, Mexico or a warmer climate, going to other countries or taking their whole family out, homeschooling, working remotely and living in a camper for a year or permanently selling their homes, right? So there's all these like great shifts that have happened. And now organizations are struggling to find people to hold down the jobs that keep the lights on.
I'll pile on to maybe why it's happening too is, this notion that as an employer, I would post jobs and because I need product to go out the door and I would wait for candidates and here's what the job pays. Would you like the job or not? Come transact your hours for these dollars. And, this inventory that people are taking now, it's almost put this thing on the conversation as if I'm the hiring manager or the employer. It's like, well, here's the job we have and here's what it pays. and the person goes, I can't put a roof over my head and food on the table for that amount. And then what am I supposed to do? As the business owner or the employer, I say, oh, you wanted that job where you had the roof and the food on the table? Oh, we don't have those here. Knock, knock. Federal government, can you make them come back to work so I can give them the job back where they can't have the roof or the food on their table?
Yeah.
Like, that's where we're at. Now, it calls out like the broken parts of the system that we've inherited, okay? Like, it calls out the issues with wage growth and where are all the cookies, right? If the cookies aren't with the people producing the labor and they're not with the owners of the company, like, where are the cookies? And it's really starting to call that out. And as we're coming out of this pandemic, everyone ends up in startup mode. And we talk to client after client, and it's not just about hiring the talent that's not there. It's about the banking system and the pressure on the balance sheets. And if you have money and you don't need the bank's money, they'll give you money. But if you actually need money or in a cash flow position from coming out of COVID, you can't get money or it's really expensive. So there's things behind the labor stuff, but today we're going to keep it to the Great Resignation, I guess, as much as I want to talk about the other stuff and understand like the system we're in was never perfect.
Right.
And this event has forced a rethinking of values. And if you are that single parent and you have even one child in daycare, like, why would you go to work? Like, if you take that inventory and you have like death knocking at the door, which is kind of the framing that we all get, right?
Yeah.
Why would you willfully make that choice? I'm going to go put myself at risk, spend 70% of my wage on childcare. It will never make sense. Like, you'll figure out a different way to do life.
Right.
And that's why I don't believe the elimination of the unemployment benefits fixes any of this, or, to some level it might get a little bit of bounce, but I think it goes a lot further than that. But I think those are some other reasons of why it's happening. Luke, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the gig economy too, like people are hooked on the flexibility. And if I've been making ends meet for a year, because I got, my waitressing job, I got,
DoorDash,
whatever,
Uber,
like,
Lyft,
right. So I've
right.
changed,
Yeah.
right? I didn't have access to that employment that I had done for 5 years or however long. And so that changed. So I figured something else out and was able to make ends meet, but I could kind of do it whatever days I wanted to. Like, am I really going to go back and chain myself to some sort of crazy schedule that doesn't align with my partners, doesn't align with my kids, doesn't align with my parents? Probably not. Why would I?
You
Unless
forgot
the
where you
dollars
work
are
for
big.
some asshole boss. You left that part out.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Where do I sign up?
Working for the computer on my dash,
Yeah.
like, way more fun than working for a boss in hospitality. And like, if you're a boss in hospitality, like, how are you supposed to hear that? Like, well, listen, like, if you were better than a robot, I would think about it, but you clearly aren't.
Oh,
Like, that's pretty tough. And just one more thing to add here, like, business owners who are struggling with filling positions or managers who are struggling with filling positions should just be like thanking God that Elon Musk doesn't have the Starlink internet all the way up and deployed across the globe yet. I mean, can you imagine if like 3 years from now, whenever they have that all figured out and you can, for whatever it's going to be, $150 a month, have high-speed internet anywhere? Can you imagine what the numbers would be right now? It would be crazy. Right? And it's already crazy, right? So I guess I just say that to say, like, it's not like, well, we'll go through COVID, which who knows if we're ever, like, are we coming out of COVID? I don't know, right? So, we're going to do that.
I mean, COVID is here.
Right.
Like, the flu is here. It exists. There's going to be new variants and,
Right.
like, it's how do we deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not like, the end zone line is now just 20 yards away. And if we just survive, everything will go back to normal. Like, no, more things are going to happen. More crazy changes are going to come. And for the people that just put their head in the sand and think that we're not in the new normal, to some degree, like, you're going to face a painful next couple more years until you learn it.
Yeah, suffering's coming. I mean, it's interesting. You spoke to retail and hospitality. I mean, it really is mass exodus in that space.
Well, and yeah, I mean, that's where all the jobs went away, right? Very suddenly.
But I love how they're using it as an excuse to suck at operating. It's like Scotch tape, Sharpie marker on a white piece of paper. Sorry, low on staff. Thanks for your patience. Like, I don't remember giving you that permission to not be able to operate well just because you can't hire. It's about figuring out what can you do well and really sticking to that. And that's a lot of, we're starting to scratch on impact with the folks that we work with day to day. But it's just the retail and hospitality space has been disproportionately affected by this. But I also want to call out the dissonance between what senior leaders believe versus what their workers are saying. So senior leaders are sitting here saying, we might lose at the most like 10%, but for the most part, I think this team will stay intact, as we work through the next year. And unequivocally, like, what their teams are saying is like 40% of them can't wait to get the hell out.
Yeah.
So you've got this, like, what senior leaders are believing right now versus what their teams are saying. So to anybody listening, like, don't get caught up in that. Like, understand, like, unless we're putting our arm around the folks, loving them up and saying, glad you're here, you matter, because recognizing contribution and doing all the things that we know make meaningful employment, like, they're probably gone. And if, like, bad organizations double down on bad behavior during all of this. And I think that's a lot of the cause. If you didn't have a values-driven organization, then why wouldn't you expect people to transact more? Why, how could you ever see how they're languishing right now? Yeah. So I think what we're starting to scratch at is, like, what can we do about it? And we've talked about why it exists, the impacts that it's having. But before we get into that, I want to think about those things for just a moment. Let's split over to our question of the day. Let's tackle today's question, come back and talk more about application and maybe what can organizations do to resolve this. All right, let's get into our question of the day. And today it'll be one of our favorite segments and favorite questions. Let's talk about, what are we reading? What are you guys plugged into right now? What's resonating?
Yeah, I can go. As I was thinking through this, a classic, an oldie but a goodie came to mind that I've been referencing quite a bit over the summer, and it's Traction by Gino Wickman. So I think it might even have a subtitle like the EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And, people have really built their businesses on this idea in Traction that Wickman outlines. But specifically for me, the thing that I've really gone back to over the summer with a few different teams is this idea of role clarity and the accountability chart. And he outlines that exercise in the book. But it's essentially just a methodology to get really clear on everyone's roles in the organization. And so I've done it with a couple leadership teams. We did it internally as a team, using Post-it notes and whiteboard, and just really saying, okay, here's all the work that needs to be done. Now we have to organize it where only one person's name is on each item. And that doesn't mean that we can't have other folks included and collaborate, but primarily one person needs to be accountable for each business function, each activity. And that is so elementary. And I remember when I read it, back, I don't know, when I first engaged with it, maybe 8 years ago, I was like, okay, yeah, sure. Makes sense. We can do it, on the team that I was on now or on then. And, but it worked really well. And to find myself this summer, continuing to go back to that, I think, we are in this time where a lot of people are facing ambiguity, where a lot of roles that used to exist are different, where there's a lot of new things that need to be happening day to day that people are trying to figure out where does that land, and just a lot of change. I mean, even with the Great Resignation that we've been talking about lately, there's, as people turn over, there's always a need for role clarification there. So, that's mine is traction.
Yeah. And that's, role clarity is one of those things easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah.
If more than one person is in charge, then nobody's in charge. We'll all take that. We'll take that on as a team. No, it won't ever get done.
Yeah.
Someone has to be responsible for the thing and really drive that home. And, role clarity, one of those 6 discoveries of high performance, it is fundamental to everything that we do. But you have to, again, set the time to take the inventory and to explore the same way you explore that within teams and we get clear about it. It's also equally important to explore it as an individual. What are your roles? How do you define success within them? How do your values show up within them? So you know what you're measuring against. So you kind of avoid that idea of wandering around through life. It really calls out the need for high degrees of role clarity. So as you sit there today, look around your team and think, are our roles clear? What are we supposed to be doing here? Does everyone understand their role and have context in making that happen? So good stuff.
Yeah, and it's as much about letting go of things and allowing someone else to own them as it is taking ownership and being accountable. And so, a lot of times the hardest conversations when we're talking about role clarity are, okay, well, yeah, you've been doing it for 5 years, sort of, but don't you think this other person, it fits in their role? It should be their responsibility. So you're going to have to just completely let go of how this gets done and be willing to advise, but not.
And that exercise really helps that become clear because you have these things that belong to this person undoubtedly. And then you kind of identify these things that are over here residing in a vertical. And it's wait, one of these things isn't like the other. Based on what this person is responsible for, this thing that you're doing should really be over here. But if you don't take the time to take the inventory, you'll never figure out what's creating that dissonance.
Yeah.
Right.
Hannah?
I'm going to go with a book that was pretty mind-blowing to me. I read it recently. I'd been hearing about it and finally got around to listening to it. And it's The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal. And I first got turned on to her when I started running. So early last year, I read the book, The Joy of Movement, and it has a lot of the science behind why movement is so good for us and why we as humans are built to be endurance athletes and why that's good for our brains and our bodies. And so that was kind of a follow-up to this book, The Upside of Stress, and we've talked on this podcast about the harmful effect of chronic stress and anxiety, and we've talked about trauma and, and what that does to the body if we have high cortisol and stress hormones running rampant in our bodies all the time. It can be very damaging. However, there's another side to it, and that is that stress is important for every system to grow. And stress is what makes growth possible. And so it's not about living a stress-free life. It's about more importantly, when we get stressed, what do we believe about stress and how it affects us? Because it turns out stress is actually good for us, but only if we believe that it is. So if we believe that stress is really bad and we're constantly in this, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed out, and we're thinking about all the bad things that are happening because we're so stressed, that affects the hormone levels that our brain is turning up or down, right? And that affects everything in our system. So if we believe that stress is good for us and we have positive strategies for managing stress and turning it into a positive, it is actually one of the best fuels for performance. but it's all in what we believe and which stress mitigation strategies we choose. So there's more than fight or flight. There's a lot of different ways that we can operate. So stress can make us more community oriented because we have this tendency to tend and befriend when we're feeling stressed, where we're really asking for help and we recognize the importance of the support of a community. So under stress, we can also become more community oriented. And so that's one of the, stress management tactics that is different from a fight or flight type of response. And there's a whole number of these responses that she talks about in the book, and how just by building that awareness, we can get a little more intentional about how we choose to respond under stress.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It makes me, wonder, were there any takeaways for you as a leader on, in being aware of those different ways to respond to stress, like how you would facilitate more intentionality around how a community or a team interacts with stress?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of takeaways, I think, for leaders and for organizations, right? Because stress is inevitable and also necessary. And so if we I always like to think of an organization as a system, like a body, right? There's a part of the body that's under stress, or maybe the whole system is under stress. But if you experience some kind of disruption, right, that causes stress on some level, it can become toxic, right? When you store all that energy in your body. And that's the other reason why movement is important and taking action is important, right? Because those stress hormones, when we experience some kind of trauma or disruption, they're there to make us do something, right? Yeah. It could be fight, flight. It could be befriend, build community. It could be a number of different ways that we choose to respond. But if we just sit around and let it fester and think about how bad it is, that's when it really is bad, and it can turn into disease and all kinds of things. And I think what's true for an individual and for a human body and a human, like a physical body, is true for a system that, an organizational system with multiple humans.
Sure. Law 2, thermodynamics, things fall apart. Like any system left isolated to, exist and operate on its own, entropy will occur. Yeah. That is a strong correlation between what is a singular human physical body and an organization. Like, we have got to create that caloric heat, that default to action. We've got to exercise our muscles within organizations, exercise our abilities, our capacities, and always be reaching past what we think is possible in order to find out what is. Mm-hmm. So a lot of correlations, and I really like that idea where stress is the feeder for fear and excitement.
Yeah.
Now how do I choose to interpret this stressor? Am I going to be fearful or am I going to be excited? Mm-hmm. Because it's the same input. Mm-hmm. I'm facing the same thing. I just have to make that choice. Or if I get hijacked into fear, have the flag set so that I can reroute that to why am I excited about stepping to the plate with the bases loaded and 2 down on the bottom of the ninth, right? I can be fearful of that, or I can be excited about that opportunity. But it's, I don't want to lose versus how many ways can we win? So I think that's an important call out, is take that stress and let it feed the positive emotion, the excitement or the eagerness versus the fear and the anxiety. So what am I plugged in with? And I'll keep mine short. I really like this article from The Atlantic, speaking to kind of the 4 archetypes in America's political system right now. They outline, what is the free American? What is the real American? What is the smart American? What is the just American? And by running through each of those archetypes, it really develops an understanding of the political landscape and how each of those ideologies come to be. And my main takeaway from that article, and we'll list that in the resources here, I encourage everyone to give that a read, because you see how each archetype and ideology has been developed over the course of time, and where did the DNA come from for each of those. And the primary concern for me, and the ongoing concern, is all of these archetypes and ideologies have to commune in order for our country to truly be great.
Yeah.
And I think about who is the leader and what is the conversation that has to be had in order to bring urban Americans with rural Americans and the different ideologies for us to all, kind of work towards better. But I'd encourage everyone that's listening to go give that a read. It's powerful. I keep going back to it time and again as I think about what is the impact of where we are today on our future ecosystem, whether that's the economic ecosystem, workforce, labor, education, however we want to define it. Education, it has a lot of, those ideologies influence a lot of our operating system. So it's something that I want to understand and continue to kind of pull thread on.
Yeah, it's one of those that the tab just stays open.
Yeah.
Like it's on my phone, an open tab, and when I'm starting to smell this value incongruence internally in an organization, it's one of those things that I go back and say, okay, let me use this to help map the relationships here, because I see people talking at each other but past each other and completely missing the value drivers for the group that they're talking to. So yeah, really interesting, really helpful, but also a little bit frightening.
It's frightening
to see the divide between us really spelled out in concrete ways, and the anthropology there. So that's a good one, Chris.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for jumping in here on the question of the day, and let's kind of get back to our episode now. So back to this idea of the Great Resignation, it has literally put everyone back in startup mode.
Which is fascinating to think about, because then people who were already in startup mode, meaning literal startups, probably may have an advantage right now, because that's how it was already hard, and we're already trying to figure out how to do this thing, and we're already having to think about what to do next or what to do differently and how to be successful.
Right. So, the environment favors those who don't have a pre-established trajectory. So really, if I'm a bigger brand, the only thing I have that I can count on is whatever brand affinity I can carry forward.
Yep.
Okay, so if I'm a clothing retailer and I have a strong brand, I can assume that for maybe another 6 months or a year, people are going to come to me first that have affinity for my brand. That's the card I have that the startup clothing brand doesn't have, and whatever capital that I have. So that's it. That's not a ton of lead time over the competition. And so I'm really kind of enthralled by this idea of how do non-startups behave like startups, play the one or two cards that you've got. But other than that, you got to be drawing from the startup card deck, right? And using whatever you can learn from that if you're going to successfully navigate this.
Yeah, it's, you speak to the big brands and I want to speak to the middle companies. We'll talk about the 30, 50, $80 million company that's privately held and had super strong trajectory going into COVID.
Yeah.
They knew what they were. They had their client base. Things were clicking along. Some months or some years they'd gross 3%, and some years they'd gross 5%, and on, right? Then COVID happens, and they have to take PPP loans, but then they also have all this strange inventory pressure. There's nothing left in their warehouse. Now they've got to supply this from wherever they're getting their supplies from. And you've got all the disruption in that channel, which creates additional cash flow issues. And now you're back into that financing system. And the last time a lot of these companies had financial pressure, like real financial pressure, was when they were starting up.
Yep.
And that owner, the founder, the senior leader of these organizations remembers exactly what that was. And it could have been 30 years ago. And guess what? Like, they've already lifted on it. Their desire to lift on that again, like, it takes, like, that is the leadership challenge, to look at that and be like, we can reinvent differently and not abdicate the accountability that this is my organization to lead, that these are the folks that I've chosen to support. Because it's deflating. It's deflating to have a company that was worth $40 million 18 months ago and is now worth the assets, like what's on the shelf and what's on the floor.
Yeah. So are you suggesting that owners, founders, leaders might be feeling the same way?
Yeah, I'm suggesting, well, we
they
know.
also want to resign?
Yeah, we know that this isn't it doesn't matter what line level you are. The senior leaders feel the same way. Like, they're feeling the same languish. They're feeling the same. And I would guess the numbers bear out something similar. Just guessing, that 40% of owners would probably choose to go start something new than re-lift on what they've already created.
Yeah.
That feels about right based on the conversations we've had.
Yeah, that does ring true. And I think, like, I want to take that to action. If you're a director, middle manager, an emerging leader, my guess is that's not the message you're getting.
Right.
Maybe. There might be someone just brutally honest, like, guys, I did all this startup thing 20 years ago. I'm just not really interested. I hope you can figure this out.
Right.
Right. My guess is that might be communicated through actions, but probably not through words. And I guess my message to the other leaders is, you should feel empowered to bring solutions, because it is that senior leader, unless you have someone that really rises to the challenge. And like, emotionally, I just think not many are going to be able to do it. So if you're in that scenario where you are the director of a vertical or whatever, you're a middle manager, like, this is your day to reinvent this thing. Whatever ideas you've had, whatever solutions you see, whatever you see a competitor doing that you're like, oh my goodness, that is genius, right? This is your time to be aggressive and bring that plan forward. And is it always going to work? No. Is it always going to be received? No. But whatever crack in the door you get, like, this is the time.
Yeah.
Well, this is, I would agree. This is like the time in history you're not going to hear no. It's like, do you have a possible solution? Yes. Let's go.
Right.
Yeah.
And be willing to do the work.
Sure.
Right. So if I go to one of those founders and say, I think this could help us, I'm willing to do 10 extra hours a week and take on this project in addition to my role. Right. You can negotiate if there's a win for you at the end, you get points in the company, whatever, so figure the compensation thing out, make sure it's fair for you, but like, be willing to do that founding work. And this is a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Be that igniter, right?
Yeah.
Like, create heat within the system, be the person that starts the things. So that's one of the actions that people can take. Is like, put your ideas forward, go action them. Remember, your values create the value.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, don't run. Those 40% of the people that are saying, I'm ready to get the hell out of here, they're just running to another organization that looks just like the one they're leaving.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no value in running. Follow your effort. Like, leaving where you are unless it materially changes your existence or somehow aligns better with your purpose, the effort you have where you are matters.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just switching one set of crazy for another set of crazy, right? The people that jump from relationship to relationship, you're going to experience a different kind of dysfunction. So to your point, Luke, is, we need invention. We need ideas. We need reimagining more than ever. Yeah. So bring your ideas forward and be willing to put the work in, because everybody needs it. And there's huge opportunity there.
Well, in one of the other action items that I think businesses can take is, and Luke, you touched on this, like, know your brand, get your arms around your brand, and understand that your brand language and what you communicate around your community and organization, that's what will attract other people to you. Like, you will attract what you believe as a leader and as an organization. So getting clear about your brand before you kind of dig into the work of the Great Resignation, I think, is an absolute requirement. You got to understand, why are we here today? What are the things that we do? Who are we? How do we, what do we do? How do we do it? And where are we going? You got to get clear around those things so that you can bring other people to that vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other action is just resist the temptation to believe that your people are the problem. Because that's something that we hear a lot too. Is like, well, if they would just do this, or they're so needy, or they just whine a lot, or whatever. Like, yeah, so does the next 20 people you're going to hire.
Yeah.
Right. So don't think that this turnover that you're going to experience is like magically going to bring you better people. The people that you have now can make it happen. You as the leader have the responsibility and should be accountable to figuring out whatever you need to figure out to pull out that latent potential in your existing system and existing people. Now, is that 100% always the rule? No, nothing is. But for the most part, if you turned over your entire team, like, you're not going to be in a better place talent-wise. So learn to transform now with the people you got. At least they have some sort of tacit understanding of your product or of the market. So, pull it out of them.
Yeah, I think one thing to observe is looking for abdicated accountability. We could be better if that person only had a brain, if that person only had a heart, if that person only had ruby slippers, like, we could be great.
Yeah.
That's crap. It's abdicating accountability. Like, let's meet the leadership challenge and say, you know what? We are all outfitted to address this challenge.
Yeah.
And look at our execution and our belief, right? Challenge our belief and our ability to execute on that belief. Solve for that, and we can bring people to our vision. So I think there's a lot of good actions there to take. Really appreciate you guys exploring that with me. Just kind of closing out, what are some final thoughts that you guys have on this Great Resignation that we're going through?
Yeah. So, the thing that really stands out to me, and you mentioned this earlier, Chris, but I'm just going to say it explicitly, that according to an article on CNBC, and we can put a link to it, and it has its source material in it, C-suite leaders expect 8% of their employees to choose to quit. And other surveys, Monster found 95% of workers have intent to leave. And Microsoft found that 41% of the global workforce is wanting to leave, which you referenced earlier. So whether those numbers are 100% accurate or not, if they're within 10%, which I know they are if they're cited in this article, like, that is a huge disparity between what leadership believes and what the actual intent is of employees. And so just a very granular, very specific, doesn't take a ton of courage, doesn't take a ton of emotional labor for a leader, is just like, find out the truth. We can deploy an employee engagement survey. We can deploy an intent to leave survey in like a week. It's not hard. Right. Make sure it's designed well. Yes. It's right contextually for the organization. Right. But it's not a huge thing. Like, just figure out what the truth is. And then we can talk about, how do we address this? What do we do about it?
Yeah. And that is something we do regularly. So if anybody listening is interested in something like that for your organization, please reach out to us. We can be found at any of the social sites, purpose and performancegroup.com. I don't know. We are easy to find. So hit us up. Hannah, last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, now's the time. Now's the time to make something new happen, even if it's something new within the organization you've been part of for a long time, right? And innovation and new ideas and new energy, that's what everybody's looking for. So, yeah, when everybody's wanting to quit, that means there's opportunity for those who stay.
Yeah, and I'll steal a little bit from Jimmy Johnson, former coach at Oklahoma State University and Hall of Famer. I love what he says. He says, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And, very true words. And now is the time for those leaders that are fatigued and they're languishing and they see abdicated accountability and they can step up and fill the voids. Like, today is your day. Never in our lives have we had this much opportunity to bring solutions and get the yes immediately. Like, every answer is yes. So let's go do the things. Looking forward to next time. We're going to talk about getting into some more detail about some tactics on how we put this into play, not just the action items themselves. So look forward to exploring more of that with you guys next time here on Magic in the Room. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.